insulin's production, storage, and its action again. So, pancreas, you know where it is. So it's retroperitoneal organ. It is behind the stomach. It has 3 or 4 parts. The head is mostly the exocrine part. So when we were in GI, we were talking about all those pancreatic enzymes. They're coming from this, the head of the pancreas, which butts up against the duodenum. This is the body, and the tail is, I always think it looks like corn on the cob. The way they draw it, it just Okay, so the endocrine portion that we are interested in is right here. It's about the size of your last 3 fingertips. Very small. That's where the endocrine portion is. That's where all the insulin is made. I always like to know in patients, I took care of patients who had partial pancreatectomies, it's like, what part did they remove? Because if they took that part off, then I know that they probably are going to have insulin replacement. So that exocrine portion, just to kind of remind you, under that second bullet, that's where the trypsin, the chymotrypsin, amylase, lipase, all of those things that help you digest fats and proteins and carbohydrates are all related there in the head and the neck. The islets are in the very tail portion, this last portion. And there is still exocrine gland activity out there, but you have these little clumps or formed islands of endocrine, which are then called the islets of Langerhans. And they contain the beta cells, the delta cells, the alpha cells that produce insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. And there's other cells that produce other hormones like amylin that we'll talk about in a little bit. You're born with about 1 million islets. So that's why we'll see when, especially in type 1, when we have an autoimmune disease that destroys those islets, it takes several years for that to happen because there's quite a few there. You can lose up to 80% of them before you get symptomatic. So you've got quite a reserve built in. This shows you an islet. This is stained to reveal the number of beta cells. This one is stained with the alpha cells. So you can see there's not that many beta cells even in an islet. They're predominantly alpha cells. And why that is so we talked about that insulin is put directly into the portal vein, really important. We talked about the liver being at the first stop and then peripheral tissue being thereafter. Insulin is stored as proinsulin. We'll talk about it on the next page in a little bit detail. Proinsulin has to be cleaved, it's inactive, but when it is released from the beta cell into the portal vein, it is, right before it's released, it's cleaved into 2 parts. One is the insulin. You'll see it is a 2-chain of amino acids that's connected by disulfide bridges. So that's a classic picture of insulin. This part that's removed, you can see it in green up there, is called the C peptide because that's the way it looks. It looks like a C. It's inactive. But it is excreted in equal molar parts with insulin. This is important because we'll measure, it's easier to measure the C peptide, so it gives us an indirect measure of how much insulin the person's producing. So if somebody comes in, here's an example. Saw a lady, was sent over to the clinic by one of the primary care docs in family medicine. And he said, I don't know what insulin or diabetes she has, but she needs insulin. Will you talk to her and give her some insulin, educate her, and send her on her way? So she came over, and she said, she was Native American, so she said, I know I have type 2 disease. I know I don't have type 1. I said, okay. So she was very well educated. And she said, and I don't want insulin because I am using the lack of insulin to lose weight. She had lost from 200 to 140 pounds by just letting her body go wild, which we will find that a lot of people with type 1 will do, especially teenage girls. They know that if they gain a little bit of weight, all you do is don't take your insulin for a while, the weight will come off. But it's dangerous and damaging to the body. So she said, I don't want to be on insulin because I know it'll gain weight. It's like, well, you're 500 right now. Okay, normal is under 100. You're 500 and you are symptomatic of everything that goes along with having high blood sugars. She said, okay, I'll let you give me a little. And I said, you know, the way we could really tell whether you have type 1 or type 2, and I said, I think you have type 1. I said, I think you're going to have insulin. The way we could do that is I can measure a C-peptide. So I can tell whether or not you're producing insulin, if you have any capacity at all. So sometimes when people present and they are more classically type 2 in presentation, but symptomatology, they are very much like somebody who's producing no insulin. This is one of the things I'll do is I'll order a C-peptide because I can tell can you produce insulin or not. So that's one of the ways we use it. And it's one of your lab. It's a common tool. Okay? So that is the reason why we use it. Okay, next page. This is an old picture, but I love it. Okay, so this shows you the biosynthesis of insulin. So, of course, since it's a polypeptide, it is coded for in the nucleus. So when you need to make insulin, you produce, first of all, messenger RNA. You transcribe the DNA into messenger RNA. You send it out here to the endoplasmic reticulum, and you make a precursor called pre-proinsulin. Then once that's established, you package it down and you cleave off part of it and you form proinsulin, the storage form in the body. The Golgi apparatus will put it into little secretory vessels, and then it will move them close to the cell membrane, and there it sits until you need insulin. And then once you need insulin, those little granules, little secretory vessels will move to the cell membrane, merge with it, and release the insulin into the portal vein. It'll release insulin and C-peptide. This is just another picture. It's not in your handout, but just another one that shows you, just gives you a different view. Sometimes I'll pull lots of pictures off, and then I like them, but they're just redundant. This one gives you another look at this one. What this one shows you that I like is that the main stimulus for insulin release is glucose. So there are sensors monitoring the ambient concentration of glucose around those beta cells. And when those levels go up, then these glucose transporters move to the cell surface, loop 2. There's all kinds of glucose transporter proteins. They happen to be loop 2 in the beta cells. Alpha muscle cells are loop 4. So those transport molecules move up to the cell membrane, merge with it, and allow the glucose to come in. ATP levels go up. You see that those ATPase sensitive channels will open, particularly the calcium channels. Calcium comes in, allows those vesicles, storage vesicles, to move to the cell membrane, and they dump the insulin into the portal vein. There's a lot of other things that also influence that, but glucose, remember, number one stimulus for insulin release. There's the pancreas, there's the head's down there. It's kind of distorted. This is the tail, just shows you what it looks like in real life. The artist always making it look prettier. Okay. So now it is important to look at how is insulin released. What does that look like? we talk about two things. One is basal, right here. So basal release occurs all the time. I don't know if you've talked about other organs that release hormones, but the usual way the pattern that the body releases the hormone is pulsatile. So it gives little, 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 little. You release about a unit of insulin an hour. That is nothing. And you do it in little bitty amounts. Okay? That's normal. That insulin people refer to as basal. Always there. It's background insulin, always in the background. Why would you need that? Now that you've heard some things about what insulin does, why do you need that? Okay, what function? Your liver is constantly putting glucose into the bloodstream. If you did not have insulin present, it wouldn't go anywhere. So that basal insulin is there to help the uptake by peripheral tissues of that glucose that's coming in. Your brain's going to take up a lot of it, but the peripheral tissues will too. This is important because when we go to replace insulin in people who can no longer make it, one of the things we do is we replace that basal insulin. And we even name insulin types as basal or bolus. So, important concept. When sugar levels or glucose levels start going high, then the pancreas or the beta cells release insulin. It releases it in a bi-phasic pattern. So you see a first phase. What do you see about it compared to the second phase? What's the difference? Higher, quicker. Okay. So that first phase is it releases probably readily made insulin that's already made, released quickly into the portal vein. It goes right to the liver. And it does it to stop that machinery, turn it around. It tells the liver, food is coming, stop breaking down. Stop making new glucose, stop breaking down glycogen and releasing it into the bloodstream. So that bolus, that first phase, goes almost all to the liver. It's really important because in type 2 diabetes, you'll lose the first phase. So you can start to imagine what happens. If you don't have first phase to tell you the liver what to do, then what's the liver going to keep doing? It's going to keep putting glucose into the bloodstream. Okay? First phase, target, liver, stop putting glucose into the circulation. That's a big thing. What do you see about the second phase? Longer duration. So this is the insulin that gets out to the periphery. This is the insulin that then moves with glucose throughout the bloodstream, and it opens up the doors to get it into the fat, get it into the muscle. So for peripheral tissues that have to have insulin in order to take up glucose, that is what that insulin is for. Usually within 2 hours, your blood sugars go back to normal, insulin levels go back to normal. Once you eat a Thanksgiving dinner, it might be 3 or 4 hours. In people with type 2, this is a very prolonged phase. It may be 3 or 4 hours. Okay? So this changes when we get to diabetes. It's really important because it adds to the problems in managing the blood sugar. This shows you in a normal person, as on the x-axis is glucose, on the y-axis is insulin. As glucose levels go up, insulin levels go up. This is normal. When we get into diabetes, we're going to find out as glucose levels go up, insulin levels don't. So that's a problem. So this is normally, if you don't have diabetes, this is pretty much what, if you're eating about 3 meals a day, this is what your blood sugar, this is actually insulin levels are looking at. You're always producing a background insulin, and anytime you eat, you have a spike and then a fall off of that insulin. In about 2 hours, it goes back to basal levels. This slide superimposes changes in glucose with what's going on with changes in insulin. You'll see that you also have a basal glucose output all the time. Liver, all the time, adding sugar in, okay? And then when you eat, you have spikes depending on what you eat. You eat a very high protein, low and fat meal, your sugars aren't going to change very much. That's probably what that lunch looks like. Breakfast, more people eat carbohydrate, get a little bit higher sugar. But you see that it never goes above that. There it's 150, but it's not going to go above 140. Doesn't matter what they ate. This is usually a bigger meal. Takes a little bit longer. Maybe there's more fat and protein in it, so it takes a little bit longer to bring it back down to normal. Again, it doesn't rise above that. That's on that 150 mark. You'll see that insulin parallels it. Basal insulin all the time. Basal glucose all the time. When the person eats, insulin levels go up. They should always be paralleling each other. When we get to diabetes, this all gets deranged. Okay, this is on page 11. I love this picture. So, we're going back over the same thing. So when you eat, the glucose, the food is broken down, you get down to those little monosaccharides and disaccharides, you get glucose, absorbed from the gut, enters the circulation. That increasing glucose level stimulates the pancreas to release insulin. Insulin and glucose move together in the bloodstream, hit the pancreas first, the liver first. Liver takes up and puts that glucose away in the presence of insulin, and then eventually blood sugar goes back down to normal and insulin levels do too. Okay, top of page 12, this is important. So in a fed state, with carbohydrate ingestion, blood sugars go up, insulin levels go up. With insulin level rise, hepatic glucose production goes down, it's suppressed. Glucose uptake by peripheral tissues goes up. Glucagon release is suppressed as long as incretins. We'll talk about those later. The muscle takes up the majority of the glucose that makes it to the periphery, and it's left over from what the brain used. Small amounts taken up by adipose tissue. There's a decrease in lipolysis. We don't need fuel from the fat. There's an increase in lipogenesis, so we're going to make fat if we've got anything left over. There's an increase in amino acid uptake by the muscle. Protein synthesis can occur. Everything builds, everything that's catabolic is suppressed. Okay. Start with number 1. Walk through these. In the intestines, carbohydrate, fat in the form of chylomicron, protein in the form of amino acids, carbohydrates in the form of glucose. Blood sugar goes up, insulin goes up, glucagon goes down. Okay. Enters the liver. Glucose is converted into glycogen. Those little green are in the presence of insulin, or it is shunted into triglyceride production. Some of the glucose is going to be taken up by the brain, and the brain's going to use it as fuel. Some is going to be taken up by blood. Blood doesn't need insulin either, so blood can take up, those red blood cells can take up glucose and use it for its fuel. Some of the glucose in the presence of insulin, those little green dots, is taken up by muscle and converted into glycogen storage, or it's it's used right away, is what this is showing as the Tca cycle. Okay. Start with number 2. Walk through these. In the intestines, carbohydrate, fat in the form of chylomicron, protein in the form of glucose. Blood sugar goes up, insulin goes down. There's a decrease in lipolysis. or that glucose that's extra is taken up by adipose tissue and stored away for later use. The liver, if it shunts glucose excess into fat production, then can produce VLDLs, glycerol, free fatty acids. Oops. And then some of the tissues can take up those that don't need insulin can take up amino acids or glucose and convert them into energy. That's fed state. That lasts for about 2 hours in most people. This is a really good slide, and it's one to commit to memory. In the fed state, insulin dominates. If sugars are going up, insulin should dominate. Glucose oxidation, glycogen synthesis, fat synthesis, protein synthesis. I am saying the same things over and over and over again. In the fasting state, glucagon predominates. Glycogenolysis goes up, gluconeogenesis goes up, ketogenesis, catabolic activity goes up so that you have energy available. Top of page 13. Fasting state. Most of the glucose is going to be taken up by insulin-independent tissues. The brain's going to get the lion's share. The blood will take up some. Neurons will take it up. I read where most of the energy in the brain goes to those sodium, potassium pumps to maintain membrane potential. That takes a lot of energy. So that the brain can send potentials down a neuron, that's where most of the energy is going. About 20% is going to be taken up by liver, muscle, adipose tissue. They need insulin. In a fasting state, most of the glucose that's produced is coming out of the liver. Glucagon is predominant. I've said everything 3 times already. Okay, so this is one for fasting state, and you can go by the 3 little or 4 little boxes. So liver, glycogen becomes glucose. Free fatty acids can be oxidized in the mitochondria of the liver to ketone bodies. Ketone bodies can be used by the brain for a subsequent fuel. Adipose tissue, triglyceride stores are broken down into free fatty acids and glycerol. Glycerol can be taken up by the liver, converted into new glucose. Free fatty acids can be taken, oxidized, and produced into ketones. The muscle can break down its glycogen stores, and the lactate and the amino acids that are produced can be sent to the liver for new glucose production. Okay. If you will nail those things down, then tomorrow will make a lot of sense. So, high blood sugar, insulin predominates, is the predominant. Storage and breakdown goes down. Glucose storage and uptake. Low blood sugar, glucagon predominates. Glucose production is the end result. Okay. Got it? Okay. All right, so that's how insulin is made. It's how it's released, the pattern it's released, and that's what it does. Now, what does it do when it gets to a cell? Well, it interacts with a receptor. Here's what the receptor looks like. It has different subunits. Insulin binds to one of the alpha subunits and causes a conformational change in that receptor. And that starts a cascade of events called signaling throughout the cell. Some of the things that happen is the cell can maintain viability. It can produce energy. It can do whatever the cell is supposed to do. The other thing it does is it mobilizes these GLUT4, which are glucose transporters. See these are 4s. In the brain, they're glucose, they're GLUT1, GLUT2 we talked about in the beta cells, GLUT4 in the peripheral cells. These are mobilized, there are pools of them in the cell, and they go to the surface membrane. And they attach to glucose and haul it in. We have some drugs that will help mobilize those receptor, or those transport molecules up to the cell membrane. This is important because if these don't exist, then the cell, we say, is resistant to the effects of the insulin. And that's a big problem in type 2, is resistance to insulin exerting an effective receptor, but no response to the glucose that is out there. These next slides just show you the same thing in a little bit different form. This is probably very simplified, but this is a good way to basically think about insulin. Insulin is like a key that fits in a door. So when it fits in that door and the key is turned, then a channel opens. So if you think about insulin, this hallway, we got this little runway. So insulin and glucose are walking down this path. They come to a door, insulin acts like the key, opens the door, glucose goes in. That is the basic concept. If the key won't fit, if the receptor will not respond to the insulin, that's a problem. If once it opens, what's inside the cell doesn't work, that's a problem. If we can't get the glucose to go into the cell, that's a problem. So there's multiple ways that the cell cannot respond and lead to hyperglycemia, or too much sugar in the blood. Regardless of what causes it, the end result is the same. Sugar stays too high in the bloodstream, and if it does it for too long, then we get complications. We get damage to different tissues and organs of the body. So in the end, in the beginning, it may be due to different reasons, but the end result of hyperglycemia, it doesn't matter how we got there, because it will cause the damage it does, regardless of why. I'm going to skip this right now. I'm going to come back to it tomorrow. Okay, if you'll go over to page 18, there's some other island hormones. We talked about glucagon. But the somatostatin is produced by the delta cells. Somatostatin is like a 3-year-old. It says no to everybody. It inhibits every other hormone. We use it we'll talk about using it in specific GI diseases. But you're not going to see a lot of it, but we have analogs of it that we can use to treat diseases a lot of times of the gut. Amylin is interesting. Amylin is a hormone that is co-secreted with insulin. And about 20 years ago, people figured out that if you gave amylin along with insulin, they actually responded better. So there is a drug on the market called Pramlin that is amylin, and we can give it, and usually it's type 1s that do this, that will take it with insulin to reduce the amount of insulin they have to take and to get better results. The last group is a very important group, and these are the incretins. These are hormones that are produced by the gut. So GLP-1 is one of the most important. There's one called GIP and there's one called GLP-2. There's probably others, but these are made by the L cells in the intestines. So not only is the brain involved in anticipating a meal, the gut is really involved. So it anticipates you getting ready to eat. As soon as you get ready to eat, it sends signals back to the pancreas and says, you're going to eat. The pancreas just gets bombarded by all these signals about she's getting ready to eat. So the incretins, these incretins, what they do is they signal back to the pancreas, to the beta cell, to start putting insulin out. And interesting is they will do it in a stepwise fashion. So if the blood sugar is going from 90 to 100, it makes it produce a certain amount of insulin, release it. And if it's going from 90 to 150, it makes it put out even more. So it has the ability to respond to how fast the sugars are rising and to what extent. What it will not do is drive the insulin so high that the person becomes low. It's very interesting. It's a very short-acting hormone. It has a half-life, what did I put down there? I did. It's just a matter of minutes. It is inactivated by an enzyme called dipeptidyl peptidase 4, important. That enzyme terminates the effects of incretins very quickly. So guess what we've done? We've made drugs that inhibit the enzyme, so that what you make incretin-wise stays around longer, and we have made incretins that we can give as drugs that act a lot longer. So we have GLP-1 agonists, and we have created DPP-4 inhibitors to enhance the effects of incretins. They are one of the up-and-coming drug classes in terms of treating type 2s that have come about in the last few years. So this shows you, so you've got an intestines is in the presence of food is sending a signal to the beta cell and saying, increase the insulin depending on the amount of glucose that is around that cell. But the other thing it does is it goes to the brain and it says, you've had enough. So it invokes satiety. So that's one of the things we see with people who take these drugs is that they get fuller faster. It's like they have lost the ability to know when they are satiated. And this drug tells them, you've had enough. So most people lose weight mostly because they just quit eating, they get full. So one of the drugs, Liraglutide, has actually been approved for weight loss under another drug name. So they increase satiety, so they work centrally, they enhance the production of insulin. So they are used predominantly in type 2. So let's see. So here's incretins coming out of the gut, GLP-1 and GIP. GLP-1's the dominant. DPP-4 enzyme inactivates it. That which escapes gets to the pancreas, increases insulin production, decreases glucagon. Glucagon gets out of whack in type 2 diabetes. So it decreases glucagon production, helps to increase glucose uptake by the muscles, decrease glucose production by the liver, and it doesn't have on here about the brain, about satiety. But I want to show you this one. This one's cool. So we talk about an incretin effect, which is over and above what the food intake that the person has. So what this is looking at is time on the x-axis. On the y-axis is insulin production. It's looking at giving somebody an IV glucose load, and the dark or the black is the oral glucose load. So if we give the glucose IV, we get around the gut, right? We trick it. So there's no incretins activated because there's no gut involved. We put it right into the bloodstream, goes right to the pancreas. So so we do get an insulin response, right? So over time, after that IV load of glucose, insulin levels come up to about 20, and then they go back down over about a 2-hour period, just like we expect. But look at what happens when we give an oral glucose load. So we have them eat 50 grams. Not a whole lot. That's about a bowl of Raisin Bran and some milk. So what happens there? Look at how high the insulin levels went. This is incretins. This is the GLP-1, GIP, GLP-2, telling the pancreas that food is coming and to secrete insulin. That is what the incretin effect is. Okay? They are a very important set of hormones. And they get deranged in type 2. Everything goes out of whack in type 2. In type 1, it just all goes away. That's another problem. On the very last page, cholecystokinin is another one of those gut hormones that tells the pancreas food is coming. Different cell type. The neuronal control, I want you to have some idea. Parasympathetics stimulate insulin secretion. Sympathetic input inhibits insulin secretion. Here's a way to remember the sympathetics. Is that oral decongestants, nasal sprays, they raise blood sugar. If you look at the package, it says, don't use it if you're a diabetic. In the fall, whenever diabetics come in, I'm always asking them, have you taken it, your blood pressure's up, your sugars are up, are you taking a decongestant? Those are sympathomimetics. They inhibit insulin release, and so blood sugars go up. The adipokines, you don't have to learn them, but what I want you to show you is that the fat, we've always thought about fat being just an inert tissue that just sits there and grows the more we eat. It is a very metabolically active tissue, and it produces all of these, and this isn't even all of them, but this is some of the cytokines it produces that affects insulin release. So there are just multitudes. There are all kinds of neuropeptides that the brain releases that I didn't even mention. There's just a multitude of things that influence how we eat, our weight, and regulates our fuel. And so we think we have a handle on it. We don't. We can deal with these major principles, and they will work to a great extent. Okay, questions about those? Because you have not had enough testing today, I did make you a poll everywhere. So if you'll go to pollev.com and put in my name, there is a survey there for you today. Because I knew you'd want to know how much you learned. It should say pancreas physiology.
There's an app you can get, and you can just click on it. It's super easy if you put it on your phone. Do you put a number on it? Yeah, 946.
Is it 946? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. Everybody get it? Find it? You don't know. How many need more time?
Just one.
Okay.
Do you know if we'll be in this room or upstairs or there?
My understanding is we go back over there tomorrow. That's my understanding. So I plan to meet you there at 10. I know I like this. I do like it.
I need to massage.
How many are done or not done? Not done. Okay. Okay. First one, the hormone responsible for lowering blood glucose is insulin. Good glucagon. Very good. Glucagon's target organ is liver. Very good. The type of hormone, what type of hormone is insulin? Anabolic. Yes. Glucose is stored in the liver as glycogen. Good job. The macronutrient that affects blood glucose the most is carbohydrate. And somebody put protein. Protein to a less extent. Well, protein won't affect blood glucose hardly at all. Not glucose is the main. Normal fasting serum blood glucose values are 70 to 99. Put it on your head. So you can look at each other and see it. Okay, good. Haven't figured out how to. Right click. Open it in an image. All right, see, okay, so y'all did great. So glucagon, epinephrine, what did I ask? I think okay, so glucagon, epinephrine, growth hormone, and cortisol. These others are, glucose is not a hormone. Acetyl-CoA is a substrate. Somatostatin is, what cell produces somatostatin? Delta cell. And amyloid, amylin is produced by the beta cell with insulin. Okay, pretty good. Okay, target organ is, you can see it, so it's brain. Okay, skeletal, muscle, liver, and what's the other one? Adipose tissue. Nobody wants to think about that? Okay.
Think about what?
Fat.
No, not today.
Which of the following happen in the liver when insulin is present? Glycogen is produced. Right. Okay, so insulin ketogenesis does not happen when insulin is present. Gluconeogenesis does not happen. Anything that is newly created, anything that is broken down, is not going to happen when insulin is present. Okay? What's created, or what is, like production. We're not going to make new glucose because there's already enough coming from diet. Which organ is most important in maintaining blood glucose in between meals? The liver. In between meals, the liver is putting glucose constantly into the bloodstream. The most important stimulant to the release of insulin from the beta cell is ARC. I just said this. Glucose. Glucose. Biggest stimulant. Okay. Y'all are tired.
Mm-hmm.
The action of first phase insulin release after a meal is to what? Very good. Decrease hepatic glucose output. The predominant hormone to maintain blood glucose during a fast is glucagon. Yes. Yes, Dan.
Is this what our quizzes will be like?
It could be very similar. They're going to be very fact. They're knowledge based.
Okay.
No cases. Very few. I can't imagine. The case would be very short if there was.
Could you go back, like, one more question? That one?
This one?
One more.
Okay.
The important stimulant. So on that one, when they did glucose through IV, it didn't raise the insulin nearly as much as the incretin did. So why is glucose
Because you didn't have the hormone
Okay.
available. But it's still the major stimulant is always glucose. It doesn't matter, and the incretin is not going to do it unless glucose is present.
Okay.
Good point. Okay, any other questions? You did well. You hung in there till 4 o'clock. All right, I will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock.